Chief Justice Raymond Zondo today releases the State of the Judiciary Report. This will be his last report as the country's Chief Justice. Deputy Chief Justice Mandisa Maya will ascend to the helm of the judiciary come September. Let's talk about these developments now with legal expert Modidima Mannya. And we'll also take a look at the state of the judiciary under Raymond Zondo ahead of the release of this report later this morning. Good morning, Modidima. Thank you as always for your time. We really do appreciate it. In about 28 minutes or half an hour's time or so, we'll get the annual Judiciary Report for 22-23. And before we get there, in terms of, what Justice Mandisa Maya is going to be inheriting, I think it's worth just getting your view on the confirmation of her now as our next Chief Justice.
Thank you, Iman, and your viewers. I think this is a phenomenal achievement. The lady in the picture behind me, almost 100 years ago, started the struggle for the emancipation of women and the participation of women in our body politics and society. The appointment of Chief Justice Maya comes as one of those phenomenal moments in our lives as a nation, coming from a colonial and apartheid system which would have confined people like Justice Maya to just being a housewife in some village there. And she has herself defied apartheid and what that fellow called Kruger or Verwoerd would have wanted her to become the Chief Justice of the Republic. This is a phenomenal moment.
And I don't want to make too many presumptions. Just talk to us a little bit more about the person in the picture behind you.
The person in this picture is the phenomenal Charlotte Mannya.
Wonderful. And it is, as you say, worth looking at how the ground has been seeded, even historically, for, the movement of justice at that time, of course, historically, to the place at which we are now, and the ascension to the bench in this capacity for the first female Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court. What's really important, and I think what's interesting, Modidima, is as Justice Maya prepares to take the reins come September, what are some of the... In fact, before we get to that question, I think that it's quite interesting that the public understand what the Chief Justice does and what they are responsible for, because a lot of people may believe that this is the purview of the, of the Justice and Constitutional Development Minister, for example, but it is the Chief Justice who, as the head of the judiciary, is responsible for the establishment and monitoring of norms and standards and the exercising of the judicial functions of all courts. So tell us more about that role.
Yes, Iman, to simplify it, we have got three arms of the state, which is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Now, these form constitute our constitutional democracy. The Chief Justice is the head of the judicial arm of the state. She is responsible, or he is responsible, for overseeing the administration of justice. And just to clarify that the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Development is in the executive, not in the judicial arm of the state. It is the policy function of the state that looks after matters of justice. So the Chief Justice runs the judicial arm, that is the courts. She or he is the equivalent of the president or equivalent of the Speaker of Parliament.
And it's so interesting because I think, as someone commented in their writing, just the appointment of the justices is like the last, connection to the judiciary that the executive has. After that, they run with it. Once that name has been confirmed, it is theirs to manage. As you say, they become the president, in a sense, of that function.
Yes, I think if you understand the totality of the scheme of our constitutional arrangement, remember we have a body called the Judicial Service Commission, which is in which Parliament is represented. This body makes recommendations to the president. So the president doesn't just wake up and say, like it happened some many years ago, a guy called L.C. Steyn was just handpicked and appointed as a Chief Justice. In this instance, the president nominates a Chief Justice. The Judicial Service Commission, which involves both the executive and the profession, the judiciary itself and Parliament, then considers the suitability of this person. So she has been found to be suitable. and then is appointed by the president. The constitution requires that she is independent of both parliament and the executive, but there are control measures. For instance, if she or he conducts himself or herself in an improper manner, there will be a process which also involves parliament and the executive as well as the Judicial Service Commission. So we have a broader scheme. It's not a simple issue of saying the president appointed or the president removed a judge.
So as Justice Maya prepares to take the reins at the start of September, what, in your view, are some of the most pressing reforms and needs in the country's court system right now? And I mean, immediately, and I'm thinking based also on some of the interviews we did earlier in the morning, I'm thinking of court backlogs and delays.
Yes, I think the biggest issue that she's going to have to contribute to resolving, and I'm using the word contribute because this is a historical challenge. Chief Justice Mogoeng had to deal with it. Chief Justice Zondo had to deal with it. She will have to deal with it. Is the issue of the optimal functionality of the courts. Reserved judgments, for instance, the courts have not yet reached at least a 90% threshold in ensuring that all reserved judgments are delivered. We still have this dangerous dichotomy between the district, regional, high courts. We need to find ways and means. The system, the value chain is way too long. Somebody has to go through many layers to ultimately exercise the right of access to justice, which is a fundamental right in terms of our constitution. We have also seen that the judiciary often gets under attack, and I say by opportunists. Some people have come out to tell us that judges are the enforcers of Roman Dutch law, when in fact the supremacy of the Constitution is what the courts focus on. So there's a need for her to communicate more. We can't afford to have the judiciary lose its integrity. We have had 2 judges impeached since the advent of democracy. I think it's important to instill a more responsible culture. Judges are human beings. They are capable of misbehaving. She's the leader. She will be the leader of the judges. She's got to make sure and do everything in her power to ensure that we have got a proper culture amongst judges. We have got delivery by the courts. We remove the bottlenecks that lead to delays in the dispensing of justice.
One of those you talk about, impeached judges, now sits on the JSC, Dr. John Tlhophe. We heard in his, when he was speaking last week in Parliament, talking about this issue of Roman Dutch law. And it's interesting that you make that separation almost between that and the Constitution. I'd like for you to perhaps in this moment then reflect on those 2 concepts and those 2 practices against the backdrop of what he was saying in terms of, changing that and not using the Roman Dutch law system.
Yes, Iman, we're not using the Roman Dutch law system, and I'm very disappointed that somebody who's been on the bench for 29 years can make such irresponsible statements. Since 1994, we are a constitutional democracy. And if you read each and every judgment, you will see that the judges are talking about the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. If you read a number of judgments, you will see that the courts refer to other jurisdictions, including English law. You will know that if you read these judgments, that the courts talk about the development of the common law. So we are not a Roman Dutch law jurisdiction. Yes, in the past we used to be, and we are no longer. The primary source of our law is the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. If a statute is inconsistent with the Constitution, the courts are likely to strike down that statute or part of that statute. If the common law is inconsistent with the Constitution, it will not be applied. If customary law, which is also a source of our law, by the way, is inconsistent with the Constitution, it will not be applied. So the narrative that has been projected that judges are enforcers of Roman Dutch law is just opportunistic nonsense.
This is worth another discussion and debate all on its own, and I'd love to invite you for that at a future date, Modidima. Holding judges accountable for misconduct is another issue that will be on the table. The process for handling judicial misconduct complaints, we understand from experts and observers in the field, is excessively slow, and we're told it's primarily due to the limited number of members on the Judicial Conduct Committee. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't necessarily think that is the case, because remember, each time there is a need for a conduct tribunal, it is constituted by appointing judges, because it's in the main constituted by judges, whether serving or retired. I think we must appreciate that judges, like all of us, Iman, also have rights in their personal capacity. If you are accused of a crime, you would want to have a lawyer, you would want to have your procedural rights respected. And I think that is what does happen. I think the difficulty with what we have witnessed, where judges were going to court, even challenging their own colleagues, does suggest that they themselves do not have confidence in the system, because a judge is a judge in and out of court. I cannot understand why a judge president, for instance, would have confidence that a chief justice who considers his conduct has done so without fear or favor and objectively and fairly. So we have had these antics of people running to court. Of course, we are a constitutional democracy. People have the right to go to court. But I think it more reflects on those whose conduct is being investigated, because we expect a very high standard of conduct and ethical conduct from judges. Now, once a judge finds himself even having to appear before a conduct tribunal, then the game is lost in respect of that individual.
Yeah, quite a hefty annual judicial report that's going to be presented. I'm not sure if Chief Justice will go through every single aspect. It's probably an executive summary that he'll share with the public. But a lot of these aspects we're talking about now are likely to form part of that. And again, it defines what Justice Mandisa Maya is going to be inheriting as she begins her work in September. As always, we appreciate your perspective, Modidima Mannya, legal expert, talking to us about the taking up of that particular role and position by Chief Justice Mandisa Maya, beginning of September, some of the challenges she's going to be facing, and reflecting, of course, on the release of this latest report, which happens in about 16 minutes or so.